Tonight, we'll explore the quiet ways that people stayed warm inside stone castles during the long winters of medieval Europe. When we think of castles, we often picture grand halls and towering walls, but we might also imagine cold, drafty corridors and freezing chambers. And while there is some truth to that image, the reality is far more interesting. The people who built and lived in these structures developed many thoughtful methods to capture and keep what warmth they could. Let's begin our journey in the Great Hall. This was the heart of the castle, the place where people gathered, ate their meals, and spent their evenings. In the earliest castles, the Great Hall featured something simple but essential, a central hearth. Picture a large fire pit positioned in the middle of the room. Above it, the ceiling would rise high, with an opening or louver to let the smoke escape. The fire would burn through the day and into the night. People would arrange themselves around it, benches and tables radiating outward like spokes on a wheel. The central hearth had a gentle, democratic quality to it. The warmth spread in all directions. Lords and servants alike could feel its glow. The fire became the focal point of life during winter months, drawing everyone closer together. Children would sit near the flames, listening to stories. Dogs would curl up on the warm stones. The elderly would position their chairs close, soaking in the heat that eased their aching joints. The fire itself required constant attention. Servants would feed it throughout the day, adding fresh logs as the old ones crumbled to ash. The type of wood mattered. Oak burned slowly and steadily, giving off consistent heat for hours. Ash wood caught quickly and burned clean. Birch produced a bright flame that lifted spirits on dark afternoons. Applewood, when available, released a sweet fragrance that filled the hall. But the central hearth had its drawbacks. Smoke did not always cooperate with the louver above. On still days, or when the wind blew wrong, the hall would fill with haze. Eyes would sting, coughs would echo. The tapestries hung on the walls would gradually darken with soot over the years. The louver itself was a simple but ingenious device. It sat atop the roof, a small structure with openings on multiple sides. No matter which direction the wind blew, smoke could find its way out through one side or another. Some louvers could be adjusted, their openings widened or narrowed depending on the conditions. But even the best louver could not solve the smoke problem entirely. In time, builders developed a better solution. They moved the fire to the wall. The wall fireplace changed everything. By constructing a proper chimney, builders could guide the smoke up and out of the room entirely. The fire now sat in a recessed alcove, framed by stone. Above it, the flue carried the smoke through the thickness of the wall and released it above the roof line. This innovation spread across Europe during the 12th and 13th centuries. Castle by castle, hall by hall, the central hearth gave way to the wall fireplace, and the air inside grew clearer. The fireplaces themselves were often quite large. Some could accommodate logs several feet long. Servants would tend the fire through the day, adding wood, adjusting the embers, ensuring the flames kept burning steadily. The fireplace opening might be tall enough for a person to stand in, and wide enough to roast a whole ox on special occasions. The construction of these great fireplaces required considerable skill. The chimney had to draw properly, pulling the smoke upward without sending it billowing back into the room. The angle of the throat, where the fireplace opened into the flue, was critical. Get it wrong, and the room would fill with smoke just as badly as before. Get it right, and the fire would burn clean and bright, its warmth radiating into the hall. Now, a single fireplace could warm a great hall, but castles had many rooms. The lord's private chambers, the family's sleeping quarters, the chapel, the kitchens, each required its own source of heat. So castles gradually acquired more fireplaces, sometimes dozens of them. If you visit a ruined castle today, you can often spot these fireplaces still. The chimney breasts project from the walls. The hearths sit empty now, but you can imagine the fires that once burned there, the orange glow against the stone. Some castles featured truly impressive arrangements. A series of fireplaces might share a single great chimney stack, their flues winding around each other as they rose through the walls. From outside you would see a cluster of chimney pots atop the roof, each one releasing its small plume of smoke into the winter air. Let us think about the stone itself. Castle walls were thick, sometimes 8 or 10 feet through. This mass of stone had an interesting property. It took a long time to warm up, but once warm, it released that heat slowly, steadily through the night. In summer, these thick walls kept the interior cool. The stone absorbed the sun's heat during the day and released it gradually, keeping the temperature stable. In winter, the process worked in reverse. The fires warmed the stone, and the stone held that warmth, radiating it back into the room for hours. The people of the medieval period understood this, even if they didn't have our modern vocabulary for it. They knew that a fire burned in the morning would still warm the room at night. They knew that the walls themselves became part of the heating system. This thermal mass, as we would call it today, was a key feature of castle design. The thicker the walls, the more heat they could store. The more heat they stored, the more stable the temperature inside. On the coldest nights, when the fires burned high, the walls would absorb that surplus warmth. In the hours before dawn, when the fires burned low, the walls would release it, keeping the chill at bay until morning. But warmth was not only about fire and stone, it was also about keeping the cold out. And this is where things get interesting. Windows were a problem. Glass was expensive, and early medieval windows often had none at all. Instead, openings in the walls might be covered with wooden shutters, or with oiled cloth, or with thin sheets of horn. These coverings let in some light while blocking the wind, but they were far from perfect. The oiled cloth was made by soaking linen in oil until it became translucent. It admitted a soft, diffuse light, not bright, but enough to see by. Horn was another option. Cattle horns could be softened with heat, then flattened into thin sheets. These horn panes were fitted into the window openings, letting light pass through while keeping out the cold. As glass-making improved, windows became more common in castles. Small panes of glass, held together by strips of lead, allowed light to enter while keeping the weather at bay. These windows were a luxury, a sign of wealth and status. The great halls of the richest lords sparkled with them. But even glass windows were drafty by our standards. The panes were small and imperfect, and the frames let air seep through. So, castle residents developed other strategies to manage the cold. Tapestries played a crucial role. These large woven hangings covered the walls, adding a layer of insulation between the cold stone and the living space. They trapped air against the wall, creating a buffer that slowed the loss of heat. And they were beautiful besides. Tapestries depicted scenes from mythology, from the Bible, from courtly life. They brought color and story into rooms that might otherwise feel bare and gray. In winter, they served both decoration and survival. The finest tapestries were made in workshops in Flanders and France, woven from wool and silk, their colors vivid and rich. Lords would collect them, moving their favorites from room to room as the seasons changed. Smaller hangings served similar purposes. Curtains hung over doorways, blocking drafts that would otherwise sweep through the corridors. Heavy drapes covered windows at night, adding another layer of protection against the cold. Every gap was an opportunity for warmth to escape, and medieval housekeepers knew to seal them all. The floors received similar attention. In the earliest periods, floors were often just beaten earth or rough stone. Rushes and straw would be scattered across them, providing a layer of insulation and absorbing moisture. These floor coverings were changed periodically, swept out and replaced with fresh material. The rushes were often mixed with herbs. Lavender, rosemary, and meadowsweet would release their fragrance when stepped upon, freshening the air of the hall. In winter, the rushes provided a barrier between cold stone and cold feet. Walking across them felt softer, warmer than walking on bare floor. In wealthier households, rugs and carpets might cover portions of the floor. These were treasured possessions, often imported from distant lands. A fine carpet underfoot made a tremendous difference on a cold morning. Let us move now to the bedchamber, where people spent their nights. Here, staying warm required particular attention. The bed itself was a complex piece of furniture. Far from the simple frame and mattress we might picture, a medieval bed was more like a small room within a room. Heavy curtains surrounded the bed on all sides. These curtains could be drawn closed at night, creating an enclosed space that trapped body heat. The sleeper would lie within this fabric cocoon, warmed by their own presence. The curtains were often layered, a lighter inner curtain of linen and a heavier outer curtain of wool or velvet. Together they created a substantial barrier against the cold air of the room. Some beds had curtains so thick that no light could penetrate them at all. The bed might also have a canopy overhead, a wooden frame supporting the curtains and creating a kind of ceiling. This enclosed the space further, making it a true sanctuary against the cold. The bedding itself was layered and substantial. Mattresses might be stuffed with straw, wool, or feathers, depending on the wealth of the household. Above the mattress went sheets of linen, then woolen blankets, then heavy quilts or coverlets. The weight of these coverings pressed down comfortingly, holding in warmth. Some beds featured a warming pan. This was a metal container, often made of brass, with a long handle. Servants would fill it with hot coals from the fire and pass it back and forth between the sheets, warming the bed before the sleeper climbed in. Imagine that sensation. You've spent the evening by the fire in the great hall. Now you climb the stone stairs to your chamber, feeling the air grow colder as you leave the warmth behind. You enter your room, where a small fire burns in the hearth, but cannot quite defeat the chill. And then you slip between your sheets, and they are warm. The warming pan has done its work. You pull the curtains closed around you, and slowly, gently, the cold recedes. Hot bricks served a similar purpose. Ordinary bricks would be heated in the fire until they were thoroughly warm, then wrapped in cloth and placed in the bed. They held their heat for hours, providing a gentle warmth at the sleeper's feet throughout the night. In some castles, the bedchambers were positioned thoughtfully. The Lord's chamber might sit directly above the great hall, where the rising heat from the fire below would warm the floor. Or the chamber might share a wall with the kitchen, benefiting from the constant fires that burned there. The kitchen was always warm. Fires burned in the great hearths throughout the day, roasting meat, boiling water, baking bread. Kitchen workers needed no additional heating. Indeed, they often grew too warm, wiping sweat from their brows as they turned the spits. This kitchen heat was not wasted. The rooms nearby benefited from it. The bakehouse, with its bread ovens, radiated warmth into adjacent chambers. Even the castle's animals contributed, their body heat warming the stables and byres. Some castles took this a step further. They placed living quarters above the animal enclosures so that the warmth rising from the livestock would heat the rooms above. Cows, horses, and sheep became inadvertent furnaces, their breath and bodies keeping the household warm. Let us think about clothing for a moment. Staying warm in a castle was not only about the building itself, it was also about what you wore. Medieval clothing was designed for warmth. Multiple layers were common. A person might wear a linen undergarment next to the skin, then a woolen tunic, then a heavier outer garment. Cloaks and mantles provided additional coverage when moving through the colder parts of the castle. Fur was prized for its warmth. The wealthy trimmed their garments with it, lining their cloaks with the pelts of squirrels, rabbits, or more exotic animals. A fur-lined hood could make all the difference on a bitter day. Ermine and sable were reserved for royalty and the highest nobility. Common folk made do with sheepskin and rabbit. Hats were essential. Much of the body's heat escapes through the head, and medieval people knew this well. Coifs and hoods and caps were worn indoors and out, keeping heads warm through the long months of winter. Gloves and mittens protected the hands. Wool stockings covered the legs and feet. In the coldest weather, people might wear felt-lined shoes or leather boots stuffed with straw. They also kept moving. A body in motion generates more heat than one at rest. Castle residents did not sit still for long hours. They walked, they worked, they busied themselves with the tasks of the day. Movement was warmth. Of course, not everyone in the castle had equal access to warmth. The lord and lady slept in the finest chambers, closest to the fires, under the warmest bedding. Their servants made do with less. Some servants slept in the great hall itself, near the embers of the fire. Others had small chambers of their own, often unheated, where they bundled together for warmth. The garrison might sleep in a barracks, sharing body heat in close quarters. The hierarchy of warmth mirrored the hierarchy of the castle. Those with power had comfort. Those without found ways to manage. Let us return to the architecture for a moment. Builders learned over time which designs retained heat better than others. Smaller rooms were easier to warm than large ones. The great hall might be impressive, but it required enormous fires to heat. The private chambers of the lord were more modest in size, and thus more easily brought to a comfortable temperature. Lower ceilings helped as well. Warm air rises, and a high ceiling meant the warmth accumulated far above where anyone could feel it. Rooms with lower ceilings kept the warmth closer to the occupants. The placement of windows mattered too. South-facing windows caught the winter sun, allowing its rays to warm the interior. North-facing windows, by contrast, let in cold and little light. Builders positioned important rooms to take advantage of the sun's path through the sky. Some castles had what we might call solar rooms. The name comes from the Latin word for sun. These were chambers designed to capture sunlight, with large windows facing south or west. On a sunny winter day, these rooms could grow quite comfortable, warmed by the rays streaming through the glass. The solar often served as a private retreat for the lord and his family. It was quieter than the great hall, more intimate, and in winter it offered a refuge of warmth and light. Ladies might spend their afternoons there, sewing and talking, while the pale winter sun filled the room. Not all heat came from fires and sunlight. The human body produces warmth, and castle designers sometimes took advantage of this. Chapels, for instance, were often unheated, but if the congregation was large enough, the collected body heat of the worshippers could warm the space. Stone that felt icy at the start of a long service would grow warmer as the Mass progressed. Gatherings in the great hall worked similarly. A feast with dozens of guests would warm the room considerably, even before the fires were lit. The presence of people, their breath and their bodies, added to the heat. In the coldest months, communities drew together. Isolation was dangerous. Warmth was found in numbers, in the press of bodies, in the shared fire. Let us spend a moment thinking about the fuel that made all this possible. Fire requires something to burn, and in medieval Europe, that something was usually wood. Castles consumed vast quantities of wood. The fireplaces burned through logs at a tremendous rate. A great household might need hundreds of cartloads of wood to get through a single winter. Managing this supply was a serious undertaking. Forests had to be maintained, trees felled, logs cut and split and hauled to the castle. Woodpiles accumulated in the courtyards, stacked and ready for the fires. The woodward, the official responsible for the castle's fuel supply, was an important member of the household. In some regions where wood was scarce, people burned peat instead. This compressed plant material dug from bogs, dried and stacked, burned with a distinctive smell and a steady warm glow. Coal was used in some places as well, though it was not as common as wood. The choice of fuel affected the character of the fire. Wood fires crackled and popped. Peat fires burned more quietly, with a rich, earthy scent. Coal fires gave off intense heat but required different grates and handling. The fireplace mantle, by the way, had a practical purpose beyond decoration. It projected out from the wall above the hearth, deflecting smoke upward into the chimney. Without it, smoke would curl out into the room. The mantle kept the air clear and directed the heat where it was wanted. As the medieval period progressed, heating technology continued to evolve. In some regions, people developed early forms of central heating. The hypocaust, an ancient Roman system, channeled hot air beneath floors and through walls. Though this knowledge was largely lost in Western Europe during the early medieval period, some monasteries and palaces experimented with similar systems. Hot air from a furnace would flow through channels in the floor, warming the stones from below. These systems were rare and expensive. Most castles relied on the simpler method of individual fireplaces, but the concept shows that people were always seeking better ways to stay warm, always innovating against the cold. Let us think about what winter meant for daily life in a castle. The routines changed with the season. Days were shorter. The sun rose late and set early. Candles and torches supplemented the weak winter light. Activities that required daylight had to be compressed into fewer hours. Outdoor work diminished. In summer, the castle bustled with activity in the courtyards and gardens. In winter, people retreated indoors. The great hall became the center of life, the gathering place where all could share the warmth. Food changed, too. Fresh vegetables were scarce. Salted meat and preserved provisions dominated the table. Hot pottage, a kind of thick stew, was a staple, warming from the inside as the fire warmed from without. Ale and wine were served warm in winter. People heated pokers in the fire and plunged them into their cups, bringing the liquid to a gentle warmth. Spiced wine, mulled with cinnamon and cloves, was a special treat on the coldest nights. The long evenings were filled with entertainment. Musicians played, stories were told, games were played by firelight. Winter was a season of rest, of waiting, of gathering strength for the work that spring would bring. And through it all, the fire burned. Picture yourself now in a castle on a winter night. Outside, snow falls softly on the battlements. The wind gusts across the walls. But here, inside the great hall, the fire crackles in the hearth. The tapestries glow in the firelight, their colors rich and warm. The rushes on the floor rustle softly underfoot. The smoke rises up the chimney, drawing the cold air after it, keeping the room comfortable. Around you, others sit and talk quietly. Dogs doze near the fire. A musician plucks a gentle tune on a lute. The world outside is cold and dark, but here, in this small circle of warmth, all is well. In time, you rise and make your way to your chamber. The corridors are colder here, away from the great fire. You hurry along, your breath visible in the air. Your chamber is small but not freezing. A fire has been lit in the hearth, and though it has burned low, the walls have absorbed its warmth. They radiate that warmth back to you now, a gentle, steady heat. You climb into bed. The warming pan has been through the sheets, and they welcome you with comfort. You draw the curtains closed around you, sealing yourself in. The heavy covers press down, holding in your warmth. Outside, the winter wind howls. Snow piles on the windowsill. The castle walls stand firm against the cold, as they have for generations, as they will for generations more. But here in your enclosed bed, you are safe. You are warm. The cold is kept at bay by stone and fire, by cloth and curtain, by the wisdom of builders who understood what winter required. This is how they lived, the people of the medieval world. They built their fortresses not only for defense, but for shelter. They gathered their fuel and tended their fires. They wrapped themselves in wool and fur and huddled close together. They could not defeat winter, no one can, but they could endure it, could find comfort within it, could transform cold stone into a home. And when spring came at last, when the snow melted and the days lengthened, they emerged from their castles ready for the work ahead. The winter had been long, but they had kept warm through it. Tonight, as you rest, perhaps you can feel some echo of that ancient warmth. The fire in the hearth, the tapestries on the walls, the heavy blankets on the bed, the simple human need for warmth, and the countless ways people have found to meet it. The castle stands quiet now. The fire burns low. The snow continues to fall, soft and silent outside the thick stone walls. And you are warm, you are safe, you are home. Rest well.